Grand Orient Masonry Unmasked. Part 3. Chapter 5. The Union and Illuminism of Freemasonry. With the aid of Voltaire and of his party, Freemasonry rapidly spread amongst the higher classes of France, and wherever else in Europe the influence of the French infidels extended. It soon after obtained immense power of union and propagandism. In France and everywhere else it had an English, a Scotch, and a local obedience. These had separate constitutions and officers, even separate grades, but all were identical in essence and in aim. A brother in one was a brother in all. However, it seemed to the leaders that more unity was needed, and aided by the adhesion of the Duke of Chartres, subsequently better known as the Duke of Orleans, the infamous Philippe Égalité, who was Grand Master of the Scotch Masonic body in France, the French Masons in the English obedience, desiring independence of the Mother Lodge of England, separated and elected him the first Grand Master of the since celebrated Grand Orient of France. 2 years later after this, the execrable androgyne lodges for women, called Lodges of Adoption, were established, and had as Grand Mistress over them all the Duchess of Bourbon, sister of Égalité. The infidels, by extending these lodges for women, obtained an immense amount of influence, which they otherwise never could attain. They thus invaded the domestic circle of the court of France and of every court in Europe. Thus, too, the royal edicts, the decrees of Clement XII and Benedict XIV against Freemasonry, and the efforts of conscientious officers were rendered completely inoperative. After the death of Voltaire, the extension of Freemasonry became alarming, but no state effort could then stop its progress. It daily grew more powerful and more corrupt. It began already to extend its influence into every department of state. Promotion in the army, in the navy, in the public service, in the law, even to the fat benefices in commendam of the church, became impossible without its aid. And at this precise juncture, when the political fortunes of France were, for many reasons, growing desperate, two events occurred to make the already general and corrupt Freemasonry still more formidable. These were the advent of the Illuminism of St. Martin in France, and that of Adam Weishaupt in Germany, and the increased corruption introduced principally by means of women Freemasons. A Portuguese Jew, named Martinus Pasquales, was the first to introduce Illuminism into the Lodge of Lyons, and his system was afterwards perfected in wickedness by Saint Martin, from whom French Illuminism took its name. Illuminism meant the extreme extent of immorality, atheism, anarchy, leveling, and bloodshed, to which the principles of Masonry could be carried. It meant a universal conspiracy against the Church and established order. It constituted a degree of advancement for all the lodges, and powerfully aided to make them the centers of revolutionary intrigue and of political manipulation, which they soon became, in the hands of men at once sunk in atheism and moral corruption. An idea of these lodges may be obtained from a description given of that of Hermanville by the Monsieur Le Marquis de Lefroy in the Dictionnaire des Erreurs Sociales, quoted by Deschamps. It is known, he says, that the Chateau de Hermanonville, belonging to the Sieur Girardin, about 10 leagues from Paris, was a famous haunt of Illuminism. It is known that there, near the tomb of Jean-Jacques, under the pretext of bringing men back to the age of nature, reigned the most horrible dissoluteness of morals. Nothing can equal the turpitude of morals which reigns among that horde of Hermanville. Every woman admitted to the mysteries became a common to the brothers, and was delivered up to the chance or to the choice of these true Adamites. Baruel, in his Memoirs sur le Jacobisme, says that M. Le Sueur, the father of the hero La Vendée, having been affiliated to a lodge of this kind, and having, in obedience to the promptings of conscience, abandoned it, and soon after was poisoned. He himself declared to the Marquis de Montron that he fell a victim to that infamous horde of the Illuminati. The Illuminism of St. Martin was simply an advance in intensity of immorality, atheism, secrecy, and terror, which already reigned in the lodges of France. It planned a deeper means of revolution and destruction. It became in its hidden depths a lair of which the atheists of the period could mature their plans for the overthrow of the existing order of things to their own best advantage. It gave itself very captivating names. Its members were Knights of Beneficence, Good Templars, the Knights of St. John, etc. They numbered, however, amongst them the most active, daring, and unscrupulous members of Masonry. They set themselves at work to dominate over and to control the entire body. They had no system, any more than any other sort of Masons, to give the world, instead of that which they determined to pull down. The state of nature, goods and the sexes in common, no God, and instead of God, a hatred for everything sustaining the idea of God, formed about the sum total of the happiness which they desired to see reign in a world where people should be reduced to a level resembling that of wild cattle in the American prairies. This was the illumination they destined for humanity. Yet such was the infatuation inspired by their immoral and strange doctrines, that nobles, princes, and monarchs of the period, including Frederick II of Prussia and the silly Joseph II of Austria, admitted to a part of their secrets, were the tools and the dupes, and even the accomplices, of these infamous conspirators. Chapter 6. The Illuminism of Adam Weishaupt. But the Illuminism of Lyons was destined soon to have a worldwide and irredactable hold on the masonry of the world by means of an adept far more able than St. Martin or any of his associates. This was Adam Weishaupt, a professor of canon law at the University of Munich. I shall detain you a while to consider this remarkable individual, who, more than any of the atheists that have arisen in Masonry, have been the cause of the success of its agencies in controlling the fate of the world since his day. Had Weishaupt not lived, Masonry may have ceased to be a power after the reaction consequent of the First French Revolution. He gave it a form and a character which caused it to outlive that reaction, to energize it to the present day, and which will cause it to advance until its final conflict with Christianity must determine whether Christ or Satan shall reign on this earth to the end. Voltaire's will to do God and man injury was as strong as that of Weishaupt. His disciples, D'Alembert, Diderot, de Milleville, Condorcet, and the rest, were as fully determined as he was to eradicate Christianity. But they desired in its stead a system with only a mitigated antipathy for monarchy, and which might have tolerated for a long time such kings as Frederick of Prussia, and such empresses as Catherine of Russia. But the hatred for God and all form of worship, and the determination to found a universal republic along the lines of communism, was, on the part of Weishaupt, a settled sentiment. Possessed of a rare power of organization, an education in law which made him a preeminent teacher in its highest faculty, an extended knowledge of men and things, a command over himself, a repute for external morality, and finally, a position calculated to win able disciples, Weishaupt employed for 50 years after the death of Voltaire his whole life and energies into the one work of perfecting secret associations, to accomplish by deep deceit and by force, when that should be practical, the ruin of the existing order of religion, civilization, and government, in order to plant in its stead his own system of atheism and socialism. He found contemporary Masonry well adapted for his ends. His object was to extend it as far as possible as a means of seducing men away from Christianity. He knew well that Masonry and the Church were in mortal conflict, and that the moment a man became a Mason, he, that instant, became excommunicated. He lost the grace of God. He passed into the state of hostility to the Church. He ceased to approach the sacraments. He was constituted in a state of rebellion. He forfeited his liberty to unknown superiors. He took a dreadful oath, perhaps many, not to reveal the secrets then, or at any after time, to be committed to his keeping. And finally, he placed himself amongst men, all of whom were his own position, and in whose society it was possible and easy for the astute disciples of Weishaupt to lead him further on the road to ruin. Weishaupt's view, then, was first to entice men into Masonry, into the lowest degree. A great gain for evil was thus at once obtained. But a man, though in Masonry, may not be willing to become an atheist and a socialist. For some time, at least, He may have in his heart a profound conviction that a God existed, and some hope left of returning to that God at or before his death. He may have entered Masonry for purposes of ambition, for motives of vanity, from mere lightness of character. He may continue his prayers, and refuse, if a Catholic, to give up the Mother of God, and some practice of piety loved by him from his youth. But Masonry was a capital system to wean a man gradually away from all these things. It did not at once deny the existence of God, nor at once attack the Christian dispensation. It commenced by giving the Christian idea of God an easy and, under semblance of respect, an almost imperceptible shake. It swore by the name of God in all its oaths. It called him, however, not a creator, only an architect, the great architect of the universe. It carefully avoided all mention of Christ, of the adorable Trinity, of the unity of the faith, or of any faith. It protested a respect for the convictions of every man, for the idolatrous Parsi, for the Mohammedan, for the heretic, the schismatic, the Catholic. By and by it gave, in higher degrees, a ruder shock to the belief in the deity, and a gradual inducement to favor naturalism. This it did gradually, imperceptibly, but effectually. Now, to a man who meditated the vast designs of social and religious destruction contemplated by Weishaupt, Masonry, especially the Masonry of his period, was the most effective means that could be conceived. In its midst, therefore, he planted his disciples, well versed in his system. These consisted of 3 classes, each class having subdivisions, and all of which were high degrees of Masonry. The first class of Illuminati was that of preparation. It consisted of 2 degrees, namely, the degree of novice and that of Minerval. The Minervals formed the great body of the order, and were under the direction of certain chiefs, who themselves were subjected to other agencies invisible to those instructed by themselves. Weishaupt instructed the teachers of the Minervals to propose each year to their scholars some interesting questions, to cause them to write themes calculated to spread impiety among the peoples, such as burlesques on the Psalms, pasquinades on the prophets, and caricatures of personages of the Old Testament, after the manner of Voltaire in his school. It is surprising with what exactitude these Minervals follow out the instructions of Weishaupt to this day. At this moment, in London, under the eyes of the Lord Chancellor, pamphlets with hideous woodcuts ridiculing David, the man after God's own heart, are weekly published. One of these, which was handed to me in a public place, had a woodcut representing the meek monarch of Judea, with a head just severed from a human body in one hand, and the sword that did the deed in the other. Another represented him amidst a set of ridiculous figures dancing. From this we can easily judge that illuminated Masonry is at work somewhere, even in London, and that the Masonry in high quarters is blind to its excesses, exactly as happened in France a few years before the French Revolution. Now these Minervals, if they manifested what the German Masons called religionary inclinations, might indeed receive the first 3 Masonic degrees, but they were not to be further promoted in Illuminism. They were relegated to the rank and file of Masonry, who were of use in many ways for the movement, but they were never to be trusted with the real secret. The teacher, without seeming to do so, was ordered to encourage, but not to applaud publicly, such blasphemies as the Minervals might make use of in their essays. They were to be led on, seemingly by themselves, in the ways of irreligion, immorality, and atheism, until ripe for further promotion and evil progress. Finally, in the advanced grades of illuminated major and minor, and in those of Scotch king and a popte, or priest, they were told the whole secret of the orders as follows, in a discourse led by the initiator. "Remember," he said, "that from the first invitations which we have given you, in order to attract you to us, we have commenced by telling you that in the projects of our order there did not enter any designs against religion. You remember that such an assurance was again given to you when you were admitted into the ranks of our novices, and that it was repeated when you entered into our Minerval Academy. Remember also how much from the first grades we have spoken to you of morality and virtue, but at the same time how much the studies which we prescribed for you and the instructions which we gave you rendered both morality and virtue independent of all religion. How much we have been at pains to make you understand, while making to you the eulogy of religion, that it was not anything else than those mysteries, and that worship degenerated in the hands of the priests. You remember with what art, with what simulated respect, we have spoken to you of Christ and of his gospel. But in the grades of greater illuminism, of Scotch knight, and of epopte or priest, how we have known to form from Christ's gospel that of our reason, and from its morality and that of nature, and from its religion that of nature, and from religion, reason, morality, and nature, to make the religion and the morality of the rights of man, of equality, and of liberty. Remember that while insinuating to you the different parts of this system, we have caused them to bud forth from yourselves, as if your own opinions. We have placed you on the way. You have replied to our questions very much more than we did to yours. When we demanded of you, for example, whether the religions of peoples responded to the end for which men adopted them, if the religion of Christ, pure and simple, was that which the different sects professed today, we know well enough what to hold. But it was necessary to know to what point we had succeeded to cause our sentiments to germinate in you. We have had many prejudices to overcome in you, before being able to persuade you that the pretended religion of Christ was nothing else than the work of priests, of imposture, and of tyranny. It will be so with that religion, so much proclaimed and admired. What are we to think of other religions? Understand, then, that they have all the same fictions for their origin, that they are all equally founded on lying, error, chimera, and imposture. Behold our secret. The turns and counter-turns which it was necessary to make, the eulogies which it was necessary to give to the pretended secret schools, the fable of the Freemasons being in possession of a veritable doctrine, and our Illuminism today, the sole inheritor of these mysteries, will no longer astonish you at this moment. If, in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, remember that the end justifies the means, and that the wise ought to take all the means to do good, which the wicked do take to do evil. Those which we have taken to deliver you, those which we take to deliver one day the human race from all religion, are nothing else than a pious fraud, which we reserve to unveil some day in the grade of magus or philosopher illuminated. The above extract will serve to show you what manner of man Weishaupt was, and the quality of his teaching he invented. His organization, for the perfection of which he deeply studied the constitution of the then suppressed Society of Jesus, contemplated placing the thread of the whole conspiracy, destined to be controlled by the Illuminati, in the hands of one man, advised by a small council. The Illuminati were to be in Masonry and of Masonry, so as to move amongst its members secretly. They were so trained that they could obtain the mastery in every form of secret society, and thus render it subservient to their own chief. Their fidelity to him was made perfect by the most severe and complex system of espionage. The chief himself was kept safe by his position, his long training, and by his counsel. It thus happened that no matter to what office or position the Illuminati attained, they had to become subservient to the general aims of the order. Weishaupt, after being deprived of his professorship in Bavaria, found an asylum with the Prince of Coburg, Gotha, where he remained in honor, affluence, and security until his death in 1830. He continued all his life the chief of the Illuminati, and this fact may account, in large measure, for the fidelity with which the Illuminati of the Revolution, the Directory, Consulate, the Empire, the Restoration, and the Revolution of 1830 inevitably carried out his program of perpetual conspiracy for the ends he had in view. It may also account for the strange vitality of the spirit of the Illuminati in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Spain, and of its continuance through the illuminated reigns of Nubius and Palmerston, the successors of Weishaupt, to our day. This we shall see further on, but meanwhile we shall glance at the first step of Weishaupt to rule over Masonry through his disciples. This was by calling together the famous General Council of Freemasonry, also known as the Convent of Wilhelmsbad. Chapter 7. The Convent of Wilhelmsbad. From its rise, Freemasonry appeared as a kind of dark parody of the Church of Christ. The names taken by its dignitaries, the form of its hierarchy, the designs affected by its lodges and obediences, the language of its rituals, all seem to be a kind of aping after the usages of Christianity. When St. Martin wished to spread his Illuminism in France, he managed to have a meeting of deputy Masons from all the lodges in that country, and this was designated as the Convent of the Gauls and Lyons. The place of its meeting was called the Holy City. Weishaupt had more extended views. He meant to reach all humanity by means of Masonry, and looked for a convent far more general than that of Lyons. When, therefore, he had matured his plans for impregnating the Masonry of the world with his infernal system, he began to cast about for means to call that convent. The Illuminism of St. Martin was in full sympathy with him, but it could not effect his purpose. He wanted a kind of general council of the Masonry, extended at the time throughout the earth, to be called together, and he hoped that, by adroitly manipulating the representatives whom he knew would be sent to it by the lodges of every nationality of Masons, his own Illuminism might be adopted as a kind of high, arch, and hidden Masonry throughout its entire extent. He succeeded in his design, and in 1781, under the official convocation of the Duke of Brunswick, acting as Supreme Grand Master, deputies from every country where Freemasonry existed were summoned to meet at Wilhelmsbad in council. They came from every portion of the British Empire, from the newly formed United States of America, from all the nations of continental Europe, every one of which, in that period, had lodges, from the territory of the Grand Turk, and from the Indian and colonial possessions of France, Spain, Portugal, and Holland. The principal and most numerous representatives were, however, from Germany and France. Through the skilful energy of the notorious Baron Neg, and another still more astute adept of his, named Ditfert, Weishaupt completely controlled this council. He further caused measures to be there, concerted which in a few years led to the French Revolution, and afterwards handed Germany over to the French revolutionary generals, acting under the Girondins, the Jacobins, and the Directory. I would wish, if time permitted, to enter at length into the proofs of this fact. It will suffice, however, for my present purpose, to state that more than sufficient evidence of it was found by the Bavarian government, which had, some 5 years later, to suppress the Illuminati, and that one of the members of the convent, the Count de Varine, was struck with such horror at the depravity of the body that he abandoned Illuminism and became a fervent Catholic. He said to a friend, "I will not tell you the secrets which I bring, but I can say that a conspiracy is laid so secret and so deep that it will be very difficult for monarchy and religion not to succumb to it." It may also of use to remark that many of the leaders of the French Revolution, and notably most of those who lived through it and profited by it, were deputy Masons sent from various lodges in France to the convent of Wilhelmsbad. Chapter 8. Kabbalistic Masonry or Masonic Spiritism. Before proceeding further with the history of Freemasonry, I shall stay a moment to consider a very remarkable feature in its strange composition, without which it scarcely ever appears. The world was never without wizards, witches, necromancers, jugglers, and those who really had, or through imposture pretended to have, intercourse with demons. Masonry, in its various ramifications, is the great continuator of this feature of a past which we had thought departed forever. Spirit rapping, table turning, medium imposture, etc., distinguish its adepts in Protestant countries and in Catholic ones. We have almost incredible stories of the intercourse with the devil and his angels, which men like the Carbonari of Italy maintain. However, from the very beginning, Freemasonry has had a kind of peculiar dark mysticism connected with it. It loves to revel in such mysteries as the secret conclaves that the Jews used to practice in the countries in which they were persecuted, and which were common among those unclean heretics, the Bulgarians, the Gnostics, the Albigenses, and the Waldenses. The excesses alleged against the Templars were also accompanied by secret signs and symbols which Masonry adopted. But whatever may have been the extent of this mysticism in Masonry before, a spurious kind of spiritism became part of its very essence since the advent of the celebrated Cagliostro, who traveled all over Europe under the instructions of Weishaupt, and founded more lodges than did any individual Freemason then or since. The real name of this arch-impostor was Balsamo. He was an inveterate sorcerer, and his peregrinations in the East picked up from every source the secrets of alchemy, astrology, jugglery, legerdemain, and occult science of every kind about which he could get any information. Like the Masonry to which he became affiliated at an early period, he was an adept at acting and speaking a lie. He suited Weishaupt, who, though knowing him to be an impostor, nevertheless employed for him the diffusion of Illuminism. Accompanied by his no less celebrated wife, Lorenza, he appeared in Venice as the Marquis Pellegrini, and consequently traversed Italy, Germany, Spain, England, the Netherlands, and Russia. In the latter country he amassed, at the court of Catherine II, an immense fortune. In France, assisted by the efforts of the Illuminati, he was received as a kind of demigod, and called the Divine Cagliostro. He established new lodges in all parts of the country. At Bordeaux he remained 11 months for his purpose. At Paris he established lodges for women of a peculiarly Kabbalistic and impure kind, with inner departments horribly mysterious. At the reception of members he used rites and ceremonies exactly resembling the absurd practices of spirit mediums, who see and speak to spirits, etc., and introduced all that nonsense with which we are made now familiar by his modern followers. He claimed the power of conferring immortal youth, health, and beauty, and what he called moral and physical regeneration, by the aid of drugs and illuminated masonry. He was the father and the founder of the existing rite of Misraim, the Egyptian rite in masonry. The scoundrel became involved in the celebrated case of the diamond necklace, and was sent to the Bastille, from which he managed to pass to England, where, in 1787, he undertook to foretell the destruction of the Bastille and of the monarchy of France, the Revolution, and, but here he miscalculated, the advent of a prince who would abolish lettres de cachet, convoke the States General, and establish the worship of reason. All these measures were resolved on at Wilhelmsbad, and Cagliostro, of course, knew that well. His only miscalculation was regarding the Prince Grand Master. The revolution went on a little too far for the wretched Égalité, who ended his treason to his house by losing his head at the guillotine. As to Cagliostro, he made his way to Rome, where the Inquisition put an end to his exploits by detecting his attempts at Illuminism. His secret powers could not deliver him from prison. He died there miserably in 1795, after attempting to strangle a poor Capuchin, whom he asked for as a confessor, and in whose habit he had hoped to escape. This impostor is of course made a martyr to the Inquisition accordingly. Masonry does much to disown Cagliostro, but with a strange inconsistency it keeps the Egyptian rite founded by him, and clings to mysticism of the debased kind he introduced. It is wonderful how extremes thus meet, how men who make it a sign of intellectual strength to deny the existence of the God that made them bow down stupidly and surreptitiously before devils, real and imaginary. Necromancy is a characteristic of Antichrist, of whom we read that he will show great signs and wonders so as to deceive, if that were possible, even the elect. He will be, when he comes, both a Cromwell and a Cagliostro. Chapter 9. The French Revolution. I may here remark that the conspiracy of the Illuminati, and of Freemasonry generally, was far from being a secret to many of the courts of Europe. But then, just as at the present moment, it had friends, female as well as male, in every court. These balked the wholesome attempts of some rulers to stay its deadly intrigues against princes, governments, and all order, as well as against its one grand enemy, the Church of Jesus Christ. The court of Bavaria found out, as I have said, but only by an accident, a part of the plans of the Illuminati, and gave the alarm. But, strange to say, that alarm was unheeded by the other courts of Europe, Catholic as well as Protestant. A revolution was expected, but, as now, each court hoped to stave off the worst consequences from itself, and to profit by the ruin of its neighbors. The voice of the Holy Father was raised against Freemasonry again and again. Clement the Eighth, Benedict the 14th, and other pontiffs condemned it. The agents and ministers of the Holy See gave private advices and made urgent appeals to have the evil stopped while yet the powers of Europe could do so. These were all baffled, and the court of the Grand Monarch and every court of continental Europe slept in the torpor of a living death, until awakened to a true sense of danger after a period far too late to remedy the disasters which irreligion, vice, stupidity, and recklessness hastened. The lodges of the Illuminati in France, meanwhile, carried on the conspiracy. They had amassed and expended immense sums in deluging the country with immoral and atheistic literature. Mirabeau, in his Monarchie Prussienne, published before the Revolution, thus speaks of these sums. Masonry, in general, and especially the branch of the Templars, produced annually immense sums by means of the cost of receptions and contributions of every kind. A part of the total was employed in the expense of the order, but another part, much more considerable, went into a general fund, of which no one, except the first amongst the brethren, knew the destination. Cagliostro, when questioned before the Holy Roman Inquisition, confessed that he had led his sumptuous existence thanks to funds furnished him by the Illuminati. He also stated that he had a commission from Weishaupt to prepare the French lodges to receive his direction. Discontent was thus sown, broadcast among every class of the population. Masonic lodges multiplied, inspired by the instructed emissaries of the remorseless Weishaupt, and the direct work of Freemasonry in subsequent events is manifest not only in the detailed prophecy of Cagliostro, founded on what he knew was decided upon, but is still more clearly evidenced by a second convent held by the French Illuminati, where everything was arranged for the Revolution. The men prominent in this conclave were the men subsequently most active in every scene that followed: Mirabeau, Lafayette, Fouché, Talleyrand, Danton, Murat, Robespierre, Cambaceres, and, in fact, every foremost name in the subsequent convulsions of the country were not only Illuminati, but foremost among the Illuminati. Some disappeared under their own guillotine. Others outlived the doom of their fellows. Constantly, the men of the whole conspiracy had understandings and relations with each other. Weishaupt, at the safe distance of Coburg Gotha, gave them his willing aid and that of the German Freemasons. This concert enabled them to float on every billow which the troubled sea of the Revolution caused to swell, and if they did not succeed in making France and all Europe a social ruin, such as that contemplated at Wilhelmsbad, it was from want of power, not from want of will. Position and wealth made many of them desire to conserve what the Revolution threw into their hands, but they remained under all changes of fortune Freemasons, as they and their successors are to this day. Perhaps, under the influence of oaths, of secret terror, and of the sect, they dare not remain long otherwise. One or two individuals may drop aside, but some fatality or necessity keeps the leaders, Illuminati, always. They, as a whole body, remain ever the same, and recoil before political adversity only to gather more strength for a future attack upon religion and order still wider and more fatal than the one which preceded it. They are not at any time one whit less determined to plunge the world into the anarchy and bloodshed they created at the French Revolution than they were in 1789. On this point, let one of themselves speak. I have been able to trace these attempts, made through the course of 50 years, under the spacious pretext of enlightening the world by the torch of philosophy, and of dispelling the clouds of civil and religious superstition which keep the nation of Europe in darkness and slavery. I have observed these doctrines gradually diffusing and mixing with all the different systems of Freemasonry. Still, at last, an association has been formed for the express purpose of rooting out all the religious establishments and overturning all the existing governments of Europe. I have seen this association exerting itself zealously and systematically till it has become almost irresistible, and I have seen that the most active leaders in the French Revolution were members of this association, and conducted their first movements according to its principles, and by means of its instructions and assistance, formally requested and obtained. Lastly, I have seen that this association still exists, still works in secret, and that not only several appearances among ourselves show that its emissaries are endeavoring to propagate their detestable doctrines amongst us, but that the association has lodges in Britain corresponding with the Mother Lodge at Munich ever since 1784. If all this were a matter of mere curiosity, and susceptible of no good use, it would have been better to have kept it to myself, than to disturb my neighbors with the knowledge of a state of things which they cannot amend. But if it shall appear that the minds of my countrymen are misled, in the very same manner as were those of our continental neighbors, if I can show that the reasonings which make a very strong impression on some persons in this country are the same which actually produce the dangerous association in Germany, and that they had this unhappy influence solely because they were thought to be sincere, and the expressions of the sentiments of the speakers. If I can show that this was all a cheat, and that all the leaders of this association disbelieved every word that they uttered, and every doctrine that they taught, and that their real intention was to abolish all religion, overturn every government, and make the world a general plunder and a wreck, I cannot but think that such information will make my countrymen hesitate a little, and receive with caution, and even distrust, addresses and instructions which flatter our conceit. These words of Robison show that as early as 1797, the connection between Freemasonry and the French Revolution was well understood. Since then, Louis Blanc and other Masonic writers have gloried in the fact. Our end, said the celebrated Alta Vendita, to which I shall have to refer presently, is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution. In fact, what Freemasonry did in France, it now labors, with greater caution, to effect on some future day, throughout the entire world. It then submitted with perfect docility to a great military leader, who rose out of its own work and principles. Such another leader will finally direct its last efforts against God and man. That leader will be Antichrist. Antichrist.